The others watched from the edge of the pit. As the human walked in alone, the door locked behind him, and the alarms echoed cold through the stone walls. They all believed he was dead already. They had seen what lived in the pit, what had torn through. Soldiers and even armored beasts. No one came back out. No one ever did. But this human smiled as he stepped into the dark, and that smile made them uneasy. The steel gate groaned as it closed behind him, and the sound echoed through the deep tunnel, while the human named Rylan walked forward alone and silent, and the aliens watching from above whispered to each other with smirks on their faces, because to them this was not a mission, it was an execution. Rylan had arrived weeks ago, a soldier from Earth, strong but quiet, always watching, always thinking, and the alien commanders did not like him because he did not speak their language. And he did not kneel like the others, and when they could not break him, they decided to test him, and that meant the pit. The pit was a place of fear, a place they only spoke about in private, where a creature older than their war waited below with claws like spears and skin like stone, a beast bred to destroy anything living, and it had never been tamed, never been wounded, and it had never left survivors. They called it the Shadow. And they believed it could smell fear and crush metal with its jaws, and now the human was walking straight toward it, wearing only light armor and a wrist light. His rifle stripped away before the trial, because they said he would not need it. They said weapons only made it angry inside. The tunnel, the air grew thick and hot, and the walls were damp with dark moss that pulsed faintly, as if alive, and Rylan kept walking slowly, counting his steps, his heart steady, his breath controlled, because fear was the first weakness, and he had already decided that if he was going to die, it would not be with fear in his eyes. Above, the commanders watched from a glass window high in the cliff built into the stone fortress, and they laughed and recorded, and wagered who would last longer, the human or the torch he carried, and none of them expected more than a minute, because the beast had not eaten in 3 days, and the last 2 victims had not even screamed before it finished them. But Rylan was different. He was not sent from Earth by chance. He had been chosen not for strength, but for something else, something deep inside him that others never understood, and that something had survived worse things than the pit, and worse monsters than the maze. He moved deeper. The tunnel opened wide into a chamber with stone walls, carved with marks like claws, and old bones scattered across the ground, and his light caught movement high on the ledge, a shadow, watching, waiting, and then the sound came low and slow, like thunder breathing, like hunger rising. The shadow more dropped from the ceiling, without a roar, without a warning, just silence, and weight, and eyes like burning stars, and it landed 20 feet away, with claws digging into the ground, and it stared at Rylan, without moving, as if confused and curious, because he did not run, he did not tremble, and he did not even raise a hand. Instead, Rylan took one step forward, then another, slowly, carefully, until he stood just 5 feet away from the beast, and still it did not strike, because something in his stance, something in his eyes told it, this was not prey, this was not meat, this was something else, something unknown. He dropped to one knee and opened his hand, showing no fear, no weapon, no threat, and the beast tilted its head, watching with eyes that flickered with heat and thought, and Rylan whispered not words but sound low and calm and steady like wind in trees, like old river songs, and the Moor stepped forward once, then again, until its nose touched his hand up. Above, the aliens fell silent, and one of them shouted for the guards to prepare the fire gates, because something was wrong. Something was not right, and the screen flickered as the beast sat down beside the human, its body still, but alert as if guarding, not hunting. Rylan reached out slowly and placed his palm on the side of the beast's neck, and the skin felt like stone, and heat and lightning, and the beast closed its eyes for a second, as if remembering something long forgotten, and when it opened them again, it let out a low sound, not of hunger but of loyalty. The guards scrambled to open the gates, ready to burn the entire chamber if needed, because this was not supposed to happen. This had never happened, and now the human was walking back toward the gate, with the monster behind him, not in chains, not in fear, but in calm, as if it had chosen him, as if it had always been waiting for someone who did not scream. As the gate opened slowly, with alarms ringing and lights flashing, Rylan stepped through first, then the Moor, and the soldiers raised weapons, but the beast did not react. It stood beside the human, and looked at the aliens like they were the ones in danger. Now, when Rylan looked at the commanders, his face calm and quiet, and then he spoke his first words since arriving, and he said, "I am ready for the next test." Silence fell over the arena, as the massive beast stepped beside the human, and did not growl, did not strike, did not run, and the commanders above could not speak, as if the air in their throats had frozen, and the guards did not move as their weapons shook in their hands, because nothing in their minds could understand what they were. Seeing Rylan stood in the center of the stone floor, his hand resting gently on the beast's shoulder, while its glowing eyes scanned the crowd around them. Eyes that once held only rage, now calm, like deep water, and the alien watchers whispered to each other, wondering if it was a trick, or a trap, or something worse, something beyond their desire. The beast had been created to destroy, not obey, and now it followed the human like a shadow, with purpose and power, and no fear. And when Ryland began walking again, the creature followed, step for step, without sound, without hesitation, and every alien in the hall stepped back, as if touched by death itself. The lead commander named Solon stepped forward from his place above the crowd, his armor gold and sharp, and his voice full of anger that tried to hide fear, and he shouted for the guards to take positions and stop the human before the monster could turn loose. And his words cracked like lightning, but no one moved, because no one wanted to be the first to test the beast's patience. Ryland looked up at Solon and said nothing, his face calm, his body still, but his eyes full of something ancient, something heavy that made Solon step back without knowing why. And then the human turned away and headed down the main hall that led toward the inner gate, the place where only elite warriors walked, and the beast moved with him, slow and quiet, like a giant shadow of muscle and bone. Guards tried to block the way, but the creature growled once, deep and low, and they scattered like dry leaves in wind. And now the halls of the fortress echoed with footsteps, both small and thunderous, as Ryland made his way deeper into the alien command post, without chains, without weapons, without permission. In the upper control room, the science cast screamed at each other, trying to explain the impossible, replaying the footage over and over, and every reading, every chart, every energy spike said the same thing. The beast had bonded with the human fully and completely, and no override signal could break it. No command, no collar, no threat. The bond was real and older than tech, older than protocol, a natural bond, one the beast had chosen not through fear but through respect and connection. And the only possible cause was something in the human, something they had not understood, something they had not planned for, and that made it dangerous beyond control. Ryland reached the gate. Two armored figures stood ready, not to stop him but to speak, and one was a war priest with skin like dark stone and eyes that burned blue, and the other was a speaker of bloodlines, an elder with long robes and golden horns. And both stared at him with silent question. Ryland stopped and placed one hand on the beast's head, then looked at the two and said nothing again, because silence had become his power. And when the priest stepped forward, he asked if the beast was tamed, or if the human had simply become a different kind of monster. And Ryland smiled and said, "The beast and I are the same. We both survived what you thought would kill us." The priest stepped aside, and the elder nodded, and the gate opened wide, revealing the inner chamber where decisions were made, and power was held, and history was shaped. And Ryland entered without fear, and behind him the beast followed, with every step shaking the ground like thunder made flesh. Inside the chamber, the High Council waited, their eyes sharp, their minds faster, and for the first time in many seasons they looked unsure, and one of them stood and asked the question they all feared: who is in control? And Ryland looked back at the beast, then forward at the council, and said, "I am not here to control, I am here to change everything." The room froze as his words spread like fire, and the council leaned forward, sensing that this moment was the beginning of something they could not stop. And Ryland walked to the center and sat down cross-legged, and the beast lay beside him like a guardian, and together they waited without speaking, without flinching. Outside the fortress, news spread like wildfire across the ranks, across the colonies, across the stars, that the human had entered the Maw's pit and returned, not just alive, but bonded with the weapon of fear, and now sat at the center of command, like a whisper before a storm. And somewhere in the shadows, others watched and listened, and made plans, because if one human could rise with the beast, then maybe others could too, and the age of fear might end, and something new might begin. The chamber was still, but the silence was not empty. It was filled with unspoken questions and heavy thoughts, and the eyes of the council burned with quiet fear as they stared at the human, who now sat in their most guarded place beside the living weapon they had once called unstoppable and unbreakable and unworthy of Merlin. Sat without movement, his eyes locked on no one, yet watching everything, his hand resting on the thick shoulder of the beast, who lay beside him, breathing slow and deep like a mountain in sleep. And not even the bravest of guards dared to step closer, because something in the air had changed. Something deeper than fear. Outside the chamber, the fortress buzzed with whispers and rumors that spread faster than commands and louder than orders, because the story of what had happened in the pit could not be contained, and even the lowest worker and youngest cadet now repeated it with awe. The human who faced the Maw, and returned not as prey but as partner. In the shadows behind the walls, a figure moved quietly, unseen by the guards and unfelt by the sensors, a figure wrapped in black fabric and strange armor made of shifting metal, a figure who had been trained to kill without question and disappear without memory, and now had been called for one purpose alone: The human must not live back. Inside the chamber, one of the council members leaned forward, her skin marked with ancient patterns. Her voice soft but sharp as she asked the question. No one wanted to speak. If the beast has chosen the human, then what does that make us? And Rylan turned his head slightly and said, it makes you blind for thinking power only lives in chains. The words cut deep, and the old warrior beside her growled low, but said nothing because something in the human's tone made anger feel useless like wind striking stone. And the council leader, who had remained silent, finally stood and asked Rylan what he wanted. And Rylan looked around the chamber and said, I want the truth. The leader tilted his head and asked what truth, and Rylan said the truth of why the beast was locked away, the truth of what it was before the pit, the truth of what you tried to erase. And the beast raised its head, as if hearing its own story echo from the past. For a moment no one spoke, and then the walls shifted, as hidden panels opened, and from them came a low hum, and a memory. Projectors slowly rising, and the council leader waved his hand, and said let him see, and the chamber filled with light and sound from the poster battlefield, scorched and broken flashes of creatures, tall and bright, fighting alongside the ancestors of the very council now watching, and among them, the more not wild, not savage, but noble, and proud, with armor carved in runes, and eyes full of thought, not rage, and beside it, a human not from Earth, but from one of the first colonies. Lost 2 times they fought together as equals, and fell together when betrayal came not from enemies, but from within, and those who feared their power sealed them away, one in chains, one in exile, and over generations the truth became myth, and the myth became fear, and the fear became law. The light faded, and the chamber fell dark, and the beast looked at Rylan with new light in its eyes, and Rylan whispered, you remember now, and the beast leaned against him, as if to say, yes. Then the alarm rang not from inside, but deep below, from the lower chambers, where secrets slept, and shadows moved, and the figure in black had passed every scan, every lock, every trap, and now stood near the back wall of the chamber, ready to strike, ready to end the human, before his truth could spread any further. The beast's eyes snapped toward the sound, and it roared, not with anger but with warning, and Rylan rolled left as a sharp bolt of silent energy sliced the space where he had been, and the chamber exploded into chaos as guards rushed in too late, and the council ducked behind shields of light, and the assassin stepped forward with blades that shimmered like he Trilon stood ready, no weapon in hand but full of purpose, and the beast lunged faster than any eye could track, and the ground cracked beneath its power as it clashed with the assassin, who danced like shadow and struck like lightning, but every strike was blocked, and every move met with force that shook the walls. In the center of it all, Rylan moved toward the council, his voice calm and loud, as he said, now you see, now you know, and now you must choose, protect the lie or follow the truth. And the council leader looked into the eyes of the beast, who was no longer a monster but a memory, and nodded once. The lights changed, and the guards aimed, not at the beast, not at the human, but at the assassin, and the figure paused, realizing the mission had failed, and for the first time seemed uncertain before vanishing in a flash of smoke and light. The chamber stood still, again broken but stronger, and Rylan looked at the council and said, this was just the first step. Long ago, before the pit, before the beast, before the lies, there had been a door hidden deep below the fortress, sealed with codes no one dared to break, covered in dust and silence, and stories that were never told. And now that door was waking, stood in the lower chamber with the beast beside him, and the council behind him, quiet and unsure, as the ancient wall began to glow with soft blue light, and strange symbols rose from the stone like steam, dancing around them with warmth and warning. And the beast lowered its head slowly, eyes filled with something like sorrow. The council leader stepped forward, his voice low, as he explained that the door had been sealed since the first uprising, when truth was dangerous and power was afraid, and the last of the freeborn warriors were locked away and forgotten. And Rylan looked at the glowing surface, and asked what was behind it. And the answer came not in words, but in memory. The wall pulsed once, then twice, then opened with a slow hiss, revealing a long tunnel lined with lights that had not seen life in 1,000 years, and the air that escaped carried with it the scent of old fire and broken stars, and something else, something like peace wrapped in dust. They walked in silence, led by the beast, who seemed to know the way, as if its mind held pieces of this place, pieces buried deep under pain and chains, and forgotten songs. And the lights followed them one by one, waking gently, as if the tunnel itself remembered them, and was glad they had returned. That at the end of the tunnel stood a chamber, round and tall, with walls covered in ancient markings that glowed with a soft blue fire, and in the center sat a chair, not made for command, but for connection, its frame shaped like arms reaching up, and its base glowing with power that hummed with life. The beast stepped forward, and placed its massive hand on the side of the chair, and the markings flared bright for a moment, and then dimmed as the room accepted the touch. And a voice echoed from the walls, soft and warm and ancient, and it spoke in a forgotten tongue that only the beast understood, and Rylan could feel it like a song. Without sound, then the beast turned to Rylan and looked into his eyes, and in that moment something passed between them, something older than fear, older than power, something made of loyalty and loss, and the beast bowed its head and stepped back, and the council watched with wide eyes as Rylan stepped forward and placed his hand on the chair. Light rose from the floor surrounding him in soft spirals, and the chamber responded like a heartbeat, steady and strong, and in that light, images formed stories. Long-buried cities floating in the sky, warriors standing side by side, humans and beasts and others, all joined by a bond, not of blood but of choice and trust. The room spoke again, this time in a voice Rylan could understand. And it said, "You are the echo of what was lost, and the seed of what may rise, and now you must choose to carry the flame or to leave it in darkness." And Rylan closed his eyes for a moment and saw the faces of those who had fallen and those who had stood, and he said, "I will carry it." The light surged once, then settled, and the markings on the wall shifted into a map, not of planets, but of paths, old routes, across the stars linking worlds that had been forgotten, and symbols appeared beside them, showing ancient allies and warnings of old enemies, and the council stared in silence as the truth unfolded before them. They had been part of something greater once, something that had held balance and peace, not by force, but by honor, and when that unity was broken, everything fell into shadow, and now through one bond between a human and a beast, the memory of that unity had been restored. But peace is not born without cost, and as the light faded, a warning came through the map, a signal rising from the far edge of the system, where something old and angry had stirred, a force that had once broken the unity, and now sensed its return. And Rylan saw it not clearly, but enough to know that war was coming. He turned to the council and said, "We cannot stay in silence anymore. The stars have heard us, and now they will come, and we must decide if we stand together or fall alone." And the council leader stepped forward and said, "We will stand with you, but the question is, will the others?" Rylan looked at the beast, who nodded once, slow and sure, and then he looked up at the ceiling, as if he could already hear the stars moving, and he whispered, "Then we will wake them one by one, world by world, flame by flame, until the darkness has no place left to hide." In the cold dark of space, where no sun had shone for centuries, a broken satellite blinked. Once, then, twice, then came alive with blue light, and from that light came a signal, soft and ancient, and full of a name no one had spoken in 1,000 years. And deep below the ice of that silent moon, something old opened its eyes back on the fortress world. Rylan stood on the edge of the landing platform with the beast beside him, as a new ship prepared for launch, not a warship, not a transport, but a memory vessel built long before the Empire, before the fall, before the silence, and now restored with care and purpose. The council had gathered to witness it all, but none spoke, not even the proud ones. Because something had changed, not just in the walls or the air, but in their hearts, because they had seen the map, they had felt the truth, and now fear had no place to hide. Rylan had chosen his path, and now he would follow it through the void, to the first flame, the first world marked on the map, a world that had once led the alliance of free beings, before it was turned to ash and forgotten by those who wrote new laws on top of lies. The beast would go with him, not as a weapon, but as a companion and guide, and beside them stood two new allies, one from the council and one from the workers, both volunteers, both changed by what they had seen and felt, and now ready to stand for something greater. The ship rose slowly, its engines humming with soft golden light, and as it lifted, the stars above seemed to grow brighter, as if watching and waiting, and as they broke through the clouds, Rylan looked down once more at the fortress, and whispered that he would return, not as a symbol, but as a spark. The journey was quiet, filled with study and preparation, as the beasts shared memories through images and sounds, teaching Rylan the shapes and signs of the old paths, and the names of those once trusted, and those who had betrayed. And Rylan listened with care, knowing every word mattered. When they reached the orbit of the dead world, the silence was thick like dust, and the planet below was cracked and cold, covered in frozen storms and broken cities, and no signal came from below, no life, no movement, only stillness, like the breath held before a scream. They landed in the shadow of a fallen spire, its bones sticking from the ice like the teeth of a buried giant, and stepped out into the wind, which carried no sound, only chill and memory. And as they walked, the beast moved with caution, its steps soft, its eyes sharp, and its ears turning with each gust of air. Rylan moved ahead, his eyes scanning the ruins for symbols and signs, and then he saw it carved into a stone wall, still glowing faintly, the same symbol that had appeared in the chair room, the same flame shape that marked the beacon worlds, and he pressed his hand to it without fear. The ground beneath them rumbled, and the ice cracked, and from the depths rose a platform covered in frost and light, and the wind stopped, as if holding breath, and the sky above them opened with a shimmer, as if the stars themselves had blinked. From the center of the platform came a voice, not loud, not sharp, but gentle and old, and it asked, "Who carries the flame?" And Rylan answered with one hand on his chest and the other on the beast. He said, "I do," and the light flared once, then calmed, and the ground split open to reveal a stair leading downward into the heart of the lost world. They descended slowly, the two allies behind them, quiet and watchful, and as they reached the bottom, they found a chamber full of crystal and wire and old machines, humming with soft blue light, and at the center sat a single stone marked with flame and truth, and next to it lay a body, unmoving, yet untouched by time. The beast stepped forward and let out a low sound, not of fear, not of warning, but of mourning, and it bowed its head, and then placed one clawed hand on the stone, and for a moment the light in the chamber turned gold, and the body began to rise, not in flesh, not in bone, but in projection, a spirit of memory and purpose. The voice returned, now clearer, now stronger, and it said, "The first has awakened, and more will come if the flame holds steady." And then it showed them visions of other worlds, other guardians, other pieces waiting to be found, and it ended with a single warning: the one who broke his watches from the void, and soon he will move. Rylan looked at the projection and nodded, and the chamber closed behind them, sealing its light within the stone, and as they rose back to the surface, the ice began to melt, and from the cracks came new light, and from the sky came the first ship, not of war, not of fear, but of hope, drawn by the signal, and ready to stand again. The stars shimmered above the second world on the map, a world wrapped in storms and silence, where mountains floated and gravity twisted, and where machines once danced through the sky, now broken, now still, and Rylan stood at the edge of the cliff, with the beast beside him, watching the clouds shift and swirl like smoke in water, and he knew something was waiting below. They had come through the old gate, traveling faster than light through lines carved into space itself, following the ancient flame routes that only the beast remembered, and now they stood before the last known stronghold of the people called the Stone Singers, builders of cities that sang and walls that healed, and hearts that never gave up, until the silence came. The ship rested behind them, anchored to the floating stone, with tethers made from memory metal, while the others prepared for descent, scanning the storm, measuring the pressure, and reading the signals that pulsed through the wind like whispers and warnings. And the beast said nothing, but its eyes never left the clouds. Then the wind changed, and the voice came not through air, not through sound, but directly into Rylan's mind, a cold voice, sharp and slow, full of pride and poison, and it said, "You are too late, the stars are mine, and the flame will do." Light closed his eyes and felt the beast grow tense, and he asked, "Who speaks?" And the voice answered, "I am the one your kind forgot, the first to fall, the last to rise, the shadow you left behind when you ran from truth and built your walls of lies." The beast growled low and deep, and Rylan opened his eyes, and said, "Then come out of the dark, if you are not afraid." And the voice laughed like glass breaking, and said, "I do not come, I do not crawl, I do not chase, because I am already here." At that moment the sky split, and a shape fell from the clouds. Not a ship, not a beast, but something in between, long and dark, and alive with red light, its skin moving like water and metal and fire, and from its sides came smaller forms, fast and sharp and angry. The storm screamed as they came down, and the platform shook, and Rylan ran toward the inner gate, where the songs of the Stone Singers still lived beneath the surface, and the beast followed close behind, roaring once to shake the air, and the others behind them moved fast, weapons raised, hearts steady. They reached the entrance just as the sky beast slammed into the upper cliffs, tearing stone like paper, and releasing a wave of red that burned the air and boiled the mist, and the gate opened only because the symbol Rylan carried glowed bright and true, and the old walls remembered him. Inside, they found a city asleep under crystal towers, and floating bridges still humming with soft tones and healing lights, and when Rylan stepped forward, the floor lit up with golden paths, and soft voices rose to greet him, not in fear, not in warning, but in welcome and hope. The beast stopped at a circle of glass, and placed its hand on the surface, and the image of the first world appeared, showing the flame still burning strong, and then another circle lit up, and another, showing other points on the map, still dark, still waiting, and one pulsing with warning. The shadow had already touched one of the flame worlds, and if they did not move fast, that world would fall, and the flame would fade. And the voice returned, now louder, now sharper, saying, "You cannot reach them in time. You cannot stop what has already begun." But Rylan looked into the center of the room, where a great machine slept, shaped like a star wrapped in rings and music, and he stepped into the light and said, "Then we move faster than ever before." And the city responded with a song of power, and the walls turned, and the Gates opened to a new tunnel. They ran together, beast and man, and friends behind them as the path rose through the city. And toward the sky where the storm waited, and the shadows circled, but the ship was ready, and the tether held, and as they lifted, the storm struck, but the flame did not fall above. The clouds, the stars returned, and in their light, Ryland saw something new: ships rising, signals blinking, names answering one by one, world by world. The call had reached, and now it was spreading beyond maps, beyond memory. But the shadow was not finished, because it had many faces and many hands, and it whispered in the dark of every system where the flame had once lived, telling lies, planting doubt, feeding fear. And now Ryland knew that the next world would not welcome them with song, but with war. He stood at the edge of the deck as the ship turned toward the next point on the map, and the beast stood beside him, quiet and steady, and their eyes met, not with fear, not with sorrow, but with fire, because they were not done, because the stars were waking, and the dark was afraid. The last world on the map glowed red, not with life, not with light, but with warning. And when the ship dropped from the stars into orbit, Ryland saw it torn by fire and storm, and shadows moving like rivers of smoke across its surface, and he knew they had arrived too late, or just in time. The beast stood at his side, eyes glowing with memory and rage, its claws tapping the floor with slow rhythm like the beating of a distant drum, and beside them, the two allies checked their gear and weapons. But their faces held something more than fear, something like faith carved from truth. This world was once called Velthar, the City of Voices, the home of the Flamekeepers, where the last of the first ones had guarded the great beacon deep beneath the Black Mountains, and now all that remained was ash and stone, and a single faint signal, pulsing from the heart of the chaos. They would not speak as the ship descended through the firestorm, because words were useless now, and only action could answer the call. And when they touched down on the scorched plain, the land trembled, and the sky cried, sparks, and the air carried the scent of old blood and broken time. Ryland stepped out first, his armor scratched and burned, his eyes sharp with fire, and the beast followed, silent but ready. And as they moved forward, the shadows parted, revealing what had become of the city. Metal towers melted and twisted, bridges broken, statues of peace shattered, and the bodies of those who had stood too late now, cold and still. But the signal still pulsed, steady and low, like a breath beneath rubble and smoke, and Ryland followed it through the ruins, his boots crushing glass and dust, his mind focused only on the light below. And then they reached the gate, torn open by force and darkness, and from inside came the echo of voices, calling, not in fear but in hope. The beast growled low, and turned toward the shadows, rising from the east. And there they stood, the ones the shadow had touched, tall and thin, with eyes like holes, and armor like rust, their weapons glowing with false flame, and their hands ready to end what the galaxy had just begun to remember. Ryland stood before them, his stance strong, his heart steady, and he said, "We came to light the last flame, and we will not leave until it burns." And the Shadowborn said, "You are too late, the flame is broken, the song is ended, and the stars belong to silence." But Ryland raised his hand, and the beast roared, and the sky cracked, and from above the ship fired a beam of gold that cut the dark like morning through fog, and the ground shook, and the gate split wider, and the last beacon chamber revealed itself, covered in dust, but still alive, still waiting. The allies charged first, weapons blazing, covering the path, while Ryland and the beast moved fast toward the heart of the chamber, and inside they found the flame core, cracked but not dead, flickering but not gone. And Ryland placed his palm on the surface, and whispered, "We are still here." And the beast touched the stone with its claw, and the core answered. Light filled the chamber, rising through the cracks, spreading into the sky, touching every shadow, and showing the truth to every eye. And the Shadowborn screamed as their lies burned, and their forms shattered, and some fell, and some ran, and some dropped their weapons, and wept without sound. The flame rose higher, and the signal burst across the stars, and the map lit up with fire, as one by one the lost worlds answered their beacons, awakening from silence, calling out names forgotten for centuries. And in every place where fear had ruled the fire, now Ryland stepped from the chamber, covered in dust and light, and the beast walked beside him, proud and calm. And the allies raised their fists, and the sky cleared for the first time in years, and from the stars new ships arrived, not to conquer but to join, drawn by the truth, drawn by the fire that would not die. The shadow fled, not gone but broken, hiding once more, waiting for a new shape, a new lie. But it would not be easy now, because the truth had returned, and the people had seen it, and the monsters they feared were now the heroes they followed. Back on the fortress where it all began, the council stood before a new gate, now marked with the symbol of the flame, and around them stood humans and aliens and others, all changed, all awakened, all ready. And the story of Ryland and the beast spread, not as a myth, but as a lesson that power is not control, That strength is not fear, that loyalty cannot be forced, and that sometimes the ones you send to die return not in chains, but in fire, and lead not with anger, but with hope. And somewhere far beyond where no map reached, a child sat by a fire, and asked an elder, "Is it true that one human faced them all and lived?" And the elder smiled, and said he did more than live. He listened, he chose, and he lit the stars again.